title of this series of classes is Religious Paradigms Believing Our Worldview. This raises a few questions. What is a paradigm? What is a worldview? And what does believing have to do with it? I added the word religious to religious paradigms because if we believe in our paradigms strongly enough, they do sometimes become a religion to us. So what is a paradigm? My definition of a paradigm is this. A paradigm is a set of ideas or explanations which, like a pair of glasses, helps us to see or understand the truth of the world around us. For example, most people believe the paradigm of atoms as the building blocks of everything in the normal world, and yet no one has ever seen an atom. We may imagine that atoms are like miniature solar systems where tiny electron planets orbit the nucleus of the atom like our planets orbit the sun. But sometimes like a pair of glasses, we need to take the glasses off or set aside the paradigm in order to see the truth more clearly. For example, a physicist has to take off the atom as a solar system paradigm and look at the electrons like waves of probabilities. He cannot know exactly where an electron is in its orbit. Now, the Oxford Dictionary of English says that a paradigm is, and I quote, a worldview underlying the theories and methodologies of a particular scientific subject, unquote. And that's not too helpful. The word paradigm comes from the Greek language meaning to show side by side. Personally, I think that paradigms are the simple explanations of the way things really are. Worldviews, on the other hand, may include several paradigms because one worldview answers many basic questions about life. But before we get into worldviews, I'd like to take a look at a couple of examples of paradigms. A number of years ago, I read a fiction novel about the discovery of a new gospel about Jesus, and at the end of this book, the author portrayed Christians as walking around almost in a trance, completely brainwashed and enamored over this new revelation. At that point, I knew two things. One, this author was not a Christian, and two, he did not know what Christians are really like. Because, to tell the truth, Christians can be some of the most hard-headed, disbelieving people on the face of the earth. For example, let's look at parts of Luke chapter 24, verses 1 through 11. Starting in verse 2, it says, "And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb." Verse 4, "While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men suddenly stood near them in dazzling clothing." Verse 5, "As the women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, 'Why do you seek the living one among the dead?' Verse 9, "And they returned from the tomb and reported all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now they were Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James. Also the other women with them were telling these things to the apostles. But these words appeared to them as nonsense, and they would not believe them." Why would they not believe the truth? These were the chosen apostles. They had seen Jesus. They had heard Jesus. They had touched Jesus. They themselves had been given the power to preach the gospel, to heal the sick, and to cast out demons. They had seen Jesus raise the dead, and he had told them that he would be killed, but that he would rise again. But their sense of a reality, their paradigm, got in the way of their belief. They had just seen Jesus flogged, which sometimes resulted in death. They had just seen Jesus crucified to death. They had just seen a Roman guard put a spear through his heart, and their belief in death was stronger than their faith in God's power to raise Jesus from the dead. Here's another example. I enjoyed watching this movie. It's called The Santa Claus, and yes, it's C-L-A-U-S-E, clause, as in the last line of a contract, because of the main character, who is Scott Calvin, which was played by Tim Allen. He clings tenaciously to his paradigm, that is, to his belief that this was all a dream, that it could not possibly be real. In the movie, this delusion lasts about 11 months. In this scene, he tries to explain his distress to the elf, Judy, played by Paige Tamada. He looks out over the balcony and he says, "But this is a dream. I mean, this is fabulous. Is that a polar bear directing traffic? I see it, but I don't believe it." And Elf Judy replies, "You are missing the point. Seeing is not believing. Believing is seeing." Now, this is a cute little bit of Hollywood script writing, which is not quite always true, but it does make a good point. People cannot see what they refuse to believe. And even Jesus told them this in John chapter 10, verses 37 and 38. And I'm going to paraphrase this. He says that if you don't believe me, at least believe the works I have done. That is, believe in the miracles that you have seen with your own eyes, so you can understand that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Okay, so what is a worldview? My definition of a worldview is this. A worldview is a set of ideas or explanations that tries to answer the most basic questions about life. Now, the Oxford Dictionary, on the other hand, says that a worldview is, quote, a particular philosophy of life or conception of the world, unquote. What is that supposed to mean? A particular philosophy of life or conception of the world? The basic questions that a worldview is supposed to answer are different depending on who is doing the asking. So let's look at a couple of examples. Okay, on the DVD, True You, number 1, Does God Exist? Dr. Stephen Meyer looks at 4 worldviews: theism, deism, materialism, and pantheism. And for these worldviews, he asks questions like the following. What is the prime reality, the thing from which everything else comes? What is the nature of human nature? Is everything predetermined, or do we have free will? What happens when we die? And how do we tell right from wrong? So how are these questions answered by these 4 worldviews? For theism, which is the belief that a good God both created everything and continues to sustain and interact with the world, question 1, what is the prime reality? What is the person or thing from which everything else comes? Theism says that it is God who created everything and continues to sustain everything by the word of his power. I'm quoting Hebrews if you want to look that up. Question 2, what is human nature? Theism says mankind was created in the image of God with many of God's qualities. We are initially good, intelligent, loving, etc., although everyone eventually falls into those bad habits or behaviors which we call sin. Question 3, do we have free will? Theism says yes, except maybe for the paradigm of Calvinist predestination, which says that God chooses who will be saved or lost, and we have no choice in the matter. Question 4, is there life after death? Theism says yes, maybe paradise or Hades until judgment, and then heaven or hell. Question 5, how do we know right from wrong? Theism says that God is the standard for right and wrong. He has given us this standard both in the law of Moses and in the example and teachings of Jesus Christ. For deism, which is the belief that God only created a clockwork world and after that has had nothing to do with it. Question 1, what is the prime reality? Deism says that God created a clockwork world and then left it to run on its own. Question 2, what is human nature? Are we basically good or bad? Deism says that mankind is pre-programmed to do whatever God wants us to do. That is, we don't have a choice. Question 3, do we have free will? Deism says no. The world is one big billiard table of bouncing atoms kicked into motion by God at the beginning. The illogic of this worldview is why it was not widespread and faded quickly in the 1700s. Question 4, is there life after death? Deism says no. God has left the world and does not care about it, so why would he resurrect and save anyone? Question 5, how do we know right from wrong? Deism says that it does not matter since we will only do what we were programmed to do anyway. For materialism or naturalism, and what that is the belief that only matter, energy, and the laws of nature exists. Nothing immaterial exists if you're a materialist or a naturalist. Sometimes we also call them atheists. Question 1, what is the prime reality? Matter and energy and the laws of nature are eternal. There is no God and nothing supernatural or immaterial exists. Question 2, what is human nature? Mankind evolved from lower forms of life and continues to evolve into ever more decent and intelligent levels of advancement. However, the evidence of atheistic regimes or materialistic regimes having slaughtered 150 million people in the 1900s would tend to contradict that idea. Question 3, do we have free will? Materialism mostly says no. Our actions are predicted by our genes and prior physical causes in a material universe. Sometimes if you're talking to an atheist or something, you get that kind of an argument. Question 4, is there life after death? No, not for materialist or atheist. Question 5, how do we know right from wrong? The only way that a materialist or atheist can know right from wrong is by subjective opinion or social contract. That is, what everyone around us agrees is right or wrong. For pantheism, which is the belief that God is only in every material thing and every material thing is God, that is, this computer is God, you are God, the bench is God, the building is God, every physical thing is God, and he doesn't really exist apart from being inside physical things, I guess. Question 1, what is the prime reality? Pantheism says that God is only in everything and everything is God and has been God forever. Question 2, what is human nature? Pantheism says that everything is God and God is only everything forever. However, karma says that people are being punished for previous bad behavior. So that's how they get a sense of justice. Question 3, do we have free will? Pantheism actually says yes, we can choose to behave better. Question 4, what happens when we die? Is there life after death? Not really. God only exists in material things, so the only possibility of life after death for them is reincarnation, which does not retain all of the person's self. Question 5, how do we know right from wrong? Pantheism would say by subjective opinion or everyone agreeing. Okay, in the book, The Universe Next Door, the author James Sire looks at the historical progression of worldviews in the Western civilizations. That is, he does not look at Buddhism or Hinduism and mentions briefly Islam, but it's mostly Western civilization that he's talking about. First, there is theism, a belief in God, up through the 1600s. Then there was deism in the 1700s, which demoted God to the position of prime mover, throwing him out of the world after the beginning. This was followed by materialism, also called naturalism, in the 1800s to the present, which says that there is no God. And, we run into this in the media in our lives all the time. This was followed by nihilism in the 1900s, which was the logical end of materialism. That is, there is no hope, no meaning, no beauty, nothing but death. And the 150 people killed by materialist regimes in the 1900s sort of underscored that. This was followed in the 1900s by existentialism, which attempted to give mankind meaning after nihilism. Then the author also gives summaries of the New Age and postmodern movements from the 1960s through the present. And he says they're not quite worldviews, but more like attitudes, because people just want to grab this and that idea and just kind of pull them all together and think whatever they want to think and do whatever they want to do. So you end up with things like witchcraft and sorcery, and people are just making up all kinds of stuff sometimes. Okay, in the universe next door, I'm going to warn you about the 4th edition, which I happen to have. He updated the book, and in the process, he made it more confusing. The author lists 7 numbered questions which a worldview is supposed to answer, but then, as he discusses each worldview, he gives a numbered list of answers without repeating the questions. And the numbered list of answers does not always correspond to the numbered list of the questions. So it's kind of confusing to understand exactly which question he is answering. If you can find a copy, maybe the 3rd edition might be more coherent for you. But it is kind of an overview of Western civilization worldviews. So James Sire's 7 questions to be answered by a worldview are as follows. Question 1, what is the prime reality? And is it God or matter? Question 2, what is the nature of eternal reality? External reality. That is, the world around us. Is it an illusion, or are there really material objects there? Question 3, what is a human being? Are we made in the image of God, or did we just evolve from slime? Question 4, what happens to a person at death? Is it paradise or Hades, heaven or hell, reincarnation as a bug, translation to a higher form? Question 5, why is it possible to know anything at all? Is it because God gave us a mind like his, or what? Question 6, how do we know what is right and wrong? Is it because God, through the Bible, tells us, or is it just our personal opinion? Question 7, what is the meaning of human history? What is the purpose of life? Is it to honor God, or is there no meaning? Now, looking at different religions instead of looking at abstract worldviews, we might be asking slightly different kinds of questions instead. For example, who is God? What is his nature? Number 2, who is Jesus in relation to God or to us? Number 3, what is salvation? And the answers, is it eternal life with God or becoming a God ourselves? If so, how do we do that? Question 4, what happens after death? And the answers could be paradise or Hades, heaven or hell, judgment, reincarnation, translation to a higher plane, or nothing. Question 5, what are the key writings of this religion? What is considered Holy Scripture, and what authority does it have? I would like to ask the following 2 questions if you're talking about looking at different religions. Who or what is the authority? And the answers, for most Protestants, it is Jesus in the Bible. For the Catholic Church, it is the Pope and the Church. For Mormons, it is their prophet. It's like, who is the ultimate authority, and what do you take over other things? In the case of Mormons, they take whatever the prophet says over their own writings, over the Bible. So it changes all the time depending on what the prophet has to say. Question 7, I would like to ask, how are we to treat women, children, and aliens or disbelievers? If you look at the law of Moses in the Old Testament, the alien was subject to exactly the same law as the Jew. There was no discrimination there. Do we force them, answers might be, do we force them into obedience, or do we help them as equals, or do we kill them as enemies and disbelievers? If you happen to read the Quran or the early teachings of Mormonism, they taught that disbelievers are eventually or should be killed. And that's kind of surprising sometimes. So in searching for the truth, how do we know anything at all? And answer 1, we know things, first of all, by direct experience. Physical things are really real and not just illusions. All physical events have causes. They do not just happen to cause themselves. Answer 2, and secondly, we know things by the testimony of reliable witnesses. We believe those sources which always tell us the truth. For example, it says in 1 John 1 and 3, 1 verse 1 and 3, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon, and our hands have handled concerning the word of life, that which we have seen and heard, we declare to you. For example, in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16, 17, and 18, we read, We were eyewitnesses of his majesty when such a voice came to him from the excellent glory. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And we heard this voice which came from heaven. For example, in Luke chapter 1, verse 2, he says, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered them to us. So from a biblical point of view, we believe trustworthy witnesses, and we believe people who have seen it themselves and tell us the truth. In conclusion, we know by both direct experience and by the testimony of reliable witnesses. So what is truth? I'm going to define truth as reality, not just physical reality, but all of reality, including the spiritual world. And as for anything spoken or written, the statements are true if they correspond to reality. But wait, doesn't the Bible say that thy word is truth? And that is correct. But if you read Genesis chapter 1, whenever God spoke, reality happened. Whatever God says cannot help but be truth or come true. And this is, if you look it up, what God says in the Psalms. He said, my memory might be failing me. It might be in Isaiah. My word will not go forth from me without accomplishing that which I intend for it to accomplish. That's a paraphrase. But you can still look it up. Okay, there are three methods of reasoning which help us to find what is true. They are deduction, induction, and abduction. Deduction applies a general rule to a specific case to get a certain conclusion. If the premises are true and the conclusion must be true by necessity. That is, since the instance of the second premise is a subset of the first premise, the laws of logic dictate its truth, like a geometric proof. Induction is a generalization from repeated identical observations, and abduction is moving from effects back to multiple possible causes. Abduction is the method of competing hypotheses or inference to the best explanation. Logically, it has nothing whatsoever to do with kidnapping. That's a joke. Here's an example of a deductive argument. Premise 1 is everything which begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion is, therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, this is a very old argument. It's called the Coulomb argument for the existence of God. And it fell out of favor with the rise of the belief that the universe was eternal. But now that science says that the universe has a beginning, it seems to make more sense. Deduction applies a general rule to a specific case to get a certain conclusion. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Inductive reasoning is a generalization from repeated observations. For example, if I drop the ball and it falls to the floor, and I drop the ball and it falls to the floor, and I drop the ball and it falls to the floor, and every time I drop something, it falls to the ground or to the floor, therefore, there must exist something like we like to call gravity, which always causes dropped objects to fall. But induction is a contingency, not a necessity. It cannot be proven to be always true unless 100% of the instances in the universe behave the same way. For example, the old European induction, this swan is white, this swan is white, this swan is white, therefore all swans are white. This conclusion turned out to be false when black swans were found in Australia. So for induction, you have to have all possible cases to pretty much prove it to be true. And that's kind of impossible unless we are God. So abduction is the method of competing hypotheses or inference to the best explanation. That is, what is the best cause? Now, in this example, the effect is that there's a layer of white ash across the ground in Washington State, that is. Although it wouldn't hurt to have it in Washington, D.C. either. Of the three choices, earthquake, flood, or volcano, what could possibly have caused the effect? Since only the volcano instead of the earthquake or flood could have caused the white ash, the inference to the best explanation would be that the volcano caused the layer of ash. This is very similar, actually, to information theory, where the definition of a well-formed question is the combination of the single question along with all possible answers, where each answer has an attached probability which indicates how close it is to being the best answer or explanation. Okay, consider this hypothesis. If the Bible is true, then there should be evidence of it in the world. Okay, we read in Psalms 19, verses 1 through 4, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, and yet their line goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. And in Romans 1:19, we read, what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and divine nature, so that they are without excuse. So, if the Bible is true, then these verses are true. And if these verses are true, then there should be evidence of the truth of the Bible in the world. And I want today to look at some of that evidence. Dr. Stephen C. Meyer has been giving this speech on the return of the God hypothesis at least since 2011. He finally published, you can find it on YouTube if you go look for it. He finally published a large book with the same title in April of 2021. It's available on Amazon if you want to buy one, although it's a big, heavy book with a whole lot of footnotes, and you need a dictionary with you when you're going to read it, okay? The book goes into three categories of evidences for the existence of God. Number one, the universe had a beginning. It is not eternal. Number two, this world, indeed the whole universe, has been deliberately fine-tuned to support life on this planet. Number three, the information which is found in all DNA looks like an extremely complex computer program, pretty much proves that there was an intelligent designer for all living things. A computer program, indeed any written information, never happens by chance. It is always produced by a mind. Why do scientists now think that there was a beginning to the whole universe? After all, up through the 1900s, it was generally assumed, at least since Aristotle's time, that the whole universe was both infinitely large and infinitely old. And these are the reasons science believes this, that there was a beginning. In 1915, Albert Einstein's theory of gravity appeared to show an expanding universe, but then he added a cosmological constant to keep his formula from expanding or contracting. Einstein later admitted that this was the biggest blunder of his career since it cost him the rewards that he might have earned as the first discoverer of the expanding universe. In 1919, Arthur Eddington photographed a solar eclipse, validating Einstein's theory. The photograph showed that the starlight had bent around the gravity well of our sun. So scientists accepted Einstein's more accurate mathematics for the calculation of gravity. If you're actually close enough to the screens, you may be able to see the faint stars that are circled in the photograph.
We can see that they're circled.
You can see about 4 or 5 of them. In 1924, Edwin Hubble saw the redshift of starlight, which indicated an expanding universe. He was looking through a 100-inch telescope and then eventually a 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar in California. It's down by LA, east of LA somewhere. This implied that the whole universe might have been or must have been smaller in the past and may even have had an actual beginning. In 1948, Robert Herman and Ralph Alpher predicted the existence of microwave radiation left over from the Big Bang that had been proposed to have happened at the beginning of the universe. In 1965, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson found the microwave background radiation from the proposed Big Bang. when they couldn't get rid of the hum coming into their antenna from every direction. They actually received a Nobel Prize for finding this and publishing it. If you don't publish it, nobody knows and nobody gives you prizes. So, in 1966, Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking solved Einstein's field equations, and it showed that a singularity at the beginning of space and time, that is, before this beginning, there was no space, no time, no matter, no energy, and no natural laws or anything. In 1989, the Cosmic Background Explorer satellite called COBE mapped the variations of this radiation, which indicated the variations in the original distribution of matter that would have allowed galaxies to form. Now, if you'll notice, the assumptions by these scientists are that the whole universe is like 13.8 billion years old and that things happened, in the way that their mathematics describe. And if, however, you believe that God created the universe, you don't have to have these gaps in your knowledge. For example, as far as the Big Bang goes, they're saying, okay, we have this singularity, and boom, something happened. And what they're saying now is, mathematically speaking, we need to have all of this stuff expand at a faster than light form for, in a trillionth of a second or something, and then stop expanding, and then go on and gradually expand. So that's a physical impossibility for them, because, of course, nothing can travel faster than light, except God, of course. And anyway, sorry, I got off on that. Okay, now all of these evidences have convinced scientists that this expanding universe has had a definite beginning, just like the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But that it was actually God doing this would come as the evidence for fine-tuning and DNA information accumulated. So, second part of this book, Return of the God Hypothesis, actually, is evidence for fine-tuning. But I'm going to read this from the book, Is Atheism Dead? In 2021, Eric Metaxas published this book, Is Atheism Dead?, as evidence that both science and archaeology point to a creator of the universe. The appendix of this book includes the following. The op-ed article, Science Increasingly Makes the Case for God, was published in the Wall Street Journal on December 25, 2014. Since then, it has garnered over 600,000 Facebook shares and more than 9,250 comments. Actually, that happened within 2 or 3 months of the article appearing, and then they stopped publishing statistics on it because it had already so far surpassed everything else that they'd ever published. It made it unofficially the most popular article in Wall Street Journal's history. This is what the article says. In 1966, Time magazine ran a cover story asking, "Is God dead?" Many have accepted the cultural narrative that he is obsolete, that as science progresses, there is less need for a God to explain the universe. Yet it turns out that the rumors of God's death were premature. More amazing is that the relatively recent case for his existence comes from a surprising place, science itself. Here's the story. The same year, Time featured the now famous headline, the astronomer Carl Sagan announced that there were 2 important criteria for a planet to support life: the right kind of star and a planet the right distance from that star. Given the roughly octillion, 1 followed by 27 zeros, planets in the universe, there should have been about septillion, 1 followed by 24 zeros, planets capable of supporting life. With such spectacular odds, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, that would be SETI, pronounced SETI, a large, expensive collection of private and publicly funded projects, was launched in the 1960s. It was sure to turn up something soon. Scientists listened with a vast radio telescopic network for signals that resembled coded intelligence and were not merely random. But as the years passed, the silence from the rest of the universe was deafening. Congress defunded SETI in 1993, but the search continues with private funds. As of 2014, researchers have discovered precisely bupkis, 0 followed by nothing. What happened? As our knowledge of the universe increased, it became clear that there were far more factors necessary for life than Sagan proposed. His 2 parameters grew to 10, and then 20, and then 50, and so the number of potentially life-supporting planets decreased accordingly. The number dropped to a few thousand planets and kept on plummeting. Even SETI proponents acknowledged the problem. Peter Schenkel wrote in a 2006 piece for Skeptical Inquirer magazine, quote, "In light of new findings and insights, it seems appropriate to put excessive euphoria to rest. We should quietly admit that the early estimates may no longer be tenable," unquote. As factors continued to be discovered, the number of possible planets hit 0 and kept going. In other words, the odds turned against any planet in the universe supporting life, including this one. Probability said that even we should not be here. Today, there are more than 200 known parameters for a planet to support life, every single one of which must be perfectly met or the whole thing falls apart. Without a massive planet like Jupiter nearby, whose gravity will draw away asteroids, 1,000 times as many would hit Earth's surface. The odds against life in the universe are simply astonishing. I'm going to interrupt this and give you one example of fine-tuning. This is a map of the possible values for up quarks and down quarks, whatever those are. The only values that would support life are in the little gray area in the middle at the tip of the arrow. So if you look at your screen, you see this arrow pointing to this little smudge in the middle. And let's zoom in for a closer look. The little gray area at the tip of the arrow holds the only possible values where life in this universe would be possible. The fine-tuning required for this area, for these 9 particles, is 1 chance in, I would guess it would be sextillion, or what's a 6? 1 followed by 21 zeros. I printed it out on the bottom so you guys could see. Those are the odds for getting this just right. Yet here we are, not only existing, but talking about existing. What can account for it? Can every one of those many parameters have been perfect by accident? At what point is it fair to admit that science suggests that we cannot be the result of random forces? Doesn't assuming that an intelligence created these perfect conditions require far less faith than believing that a life-sustaining Earth just happened to beat the inconceivable odds to come into being? There's more. The fine-tuning necessary for life to exist on a planet is nothing compared to the fine-tuning required for the universe to exist at all. For example, astrophysicists now know, or believe, that the values for the 4 fundamental forces, gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, were determined less than 1/millionth of a second after the Big Bang. Alter any one value, and the universe could not exist. For instance, if the ratio between the nuclear strong force and the electromagnetic force had been off by the tiniest fraction of the tiniest fraction, by even 1 part in a 1 followed by 17 zeros, then no stars could have ever been formed at all. This again is assuming, that your universe formed over 13.8 billion years and not was created. Feel free to gulp. Multiply that single parameter by all the other necessary conditions, and the odds against the universe existing are so heart-stoppingly astronomical that the notion that it all just happened defies common sense. It would be like tossing a coin and having it come up heads 10 quintillion times in a row. Really? And a quintillion is a 1 followed by 18 zeros. Fred Hoyle, the astronomer who coined the term Big Bang, and probably regrets having said it, said that his atheism was greatly shaken at these developments. He later wrote that, quote, "A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics as well as with chemistry and biology. The numbers one calculates from the facts seems to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question," unquote. Theoretical physicist Paul Davies has said that the appearance of design is overwhelming, and Oxford professor John Lennox has said, quote, "The more we get to know about our universe, the more the hypothesis that there is a creator gains in credibility as the best explanation of why we are here," unquote. The greatest miracle of all time, without any close seconds, is the universe. It is the miracle of all miracles, one that ineluctably points with the combined brightness of every star to something or someone, that's with a capital S, beyond itself. And yes, I had to look it up. The adjective ineluctable means unable to be resisted or avoided, inescapable. It comes from Latin meaning not and struggle out. That is, this is one fact that we cannot wiggle out of. God did create the universe. So in the book, Return to the God Hypothesis, Part 3, Dr. Stephen Meyer talks about DNA. And this is actually a picture of some DNA with, alongside of it, 3 above and 3 below, strands of RNA that were copied from the DNA. And the point being that they were copied for different proteins, each of the 6 strands, but they all cross the same little patch of DNA because the same piece of DNA can be used for several different proteins or enzymes. A single mutation, even if it is beneficial for one protein, may also destroy several others. This means that evolution is incapable of advancing in an onward and upward direction. Whether by chance or deliberate alteration, mutations must devolve and eventually destroy the genome. Anyway, the information which is found in all DNA looks and operates like an extremely complex computer program. This proves that there was an intelligent designer for all living things. Any written information never happens by chance. It is always produced by a mind. So how did this information end up inside the DNA of every cell on the planet? Who but God could have put it there? All of this evidence, the beginning, the fine-tuning, the information in the DNA, it all corroborates or supports the probability that the first statement of the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, is absolutely true. Thank you. You are dismissed. We will be back here in 15 minutes for services.